On this episode of Things That Matter, I have a very important conversation with my dear friend Efrem Buckle from South London, so stay tuned. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Things That Matter. I'm Brian Brodersen, and it's great to have you with us today. And I'm in the studio with a very, very dear friend, and this is Efrem Buckle. Efrem, welcome.
Thank you.
To Things That Matter. Welcome to California.
Thank you.
Efrem and I go way back many, many years to London. And so today, it's great to have him in the studio, and we're just going to have a conversation today. But I want to give a little background, a little history to our audience. So 20 plus years ago, my family and I, we went to London, and we planted a church. And as we were just there in the formative stages in the early days, 3 young guys walked in the door one evening, and Efrem was one of them. And the Lord just connected us from that point, and we've been wonderfully connected ever since.
Amen. No doubt.
And so, Efrem, you're pastoring Ecclēsia or Ecclēsia. That's the guy.
That's the South London way of saying it.
Yeah, the South London way of saying it. Yeah.
Ecclēsia.
Yeah. So this is a church in South London.
Yeah.
And you've also come on the staff of London City Mission.
I have. Yeah.
A mission that is 150 years old.
180.
180 years old. Yeah.
Plus.
Yeah, and I remember in London. I remember London City Mission, and we had some connections even back then.
That's right.
And you have formerly with Rob Prendergast, you guys who made up the hip hop group MOD.
Yeah.
And so you've been in urban ministry ever since I've known you.
Yeah.
And
over 20 years.
Yeah. And so you're continuing on in that. So you're in one of the greatest cities in the world. In my opinion, it is the greatest city in the world.
I'm not going to argue with you there,
Of course, we all love London. But so let's talk about some of the stuff that you guys have done. Now, as I mentioned, formally with MOD and the hip hop and the outreaches, and you and I have done on the stuff on the streets in London, and we've been all over the place doing that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit, kind of just a little bit of background about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're doing that so much these days, right?
No, not so much at all.
Yeah, you're more helping the younger generation do it.
That's right.
But kind of give us just a quick sort of a overview of that.
Yeah. So fundamentally, we were in a place where we desired to reach our community. We desired to reach our peers and our friends, our families, our neighbors, and we recognized that they weren't coming to church. There was a certain degree of disillusionment, if you like, and so we were just prayerfully considering ways of engaging people sufficiently in order to be able to give them the gospel.
Yeah.
And so we started considering different angles, and then we kind of landed on music almost by accident. I used to sing in church growing up. I used to listen to rap, but behind closed doors because it was forbidden. And Rob never rapped before becoming a Christian and using it for ministry. But then we got invited to go and share at a young offenders prison. And Rob's like, I've been doing some writing, and I heard it, and I was like, I could put a little bit of singing in with this. And that's kind of how it blossomed. And we went and, just prayerfully shared it. And it really engaged the young offenders. And so we was like, okay, maybe this is it. Yeah. And so after that, we just began to give ourselves to it in earnest, not with, back in those days, there was no YouTube, there was no internet, there wasn't even self-stardom, let alone, trying to get onto a label or anything like that. It was just purely as a ministry tool. Yeah. We want to engage people. Yeah. And so we wrote songs, and we took them out on the streets and into schools and into prisons. And we've done most of our ministry outside of the context of the church. Yeah. 90% was just amongst unbelievers. Yeah. And then we got involved with the Notting Hill Carnival outreach, which became the God Corner. And so, you've been down there.
And the Notting Hill Carnival, just for our audience, is the largest
festival.
street festival in Europe.
Absolutely.
And
it's second largest in the world outside of Rio.
Yeah, and tens of thousands of people on the streets of London. And
Well, 1 million people a day at its height.
yeah.
Literally.
1 million people a day. Yeah. Wow. No wonder it was so crowded out there those times. Yeah, that's crazy. And yes, I mean, I've seen the Lord just use you guys in such extraordinary ways in those kinds of contexts. But you were part of the church that I was pastoring. You guys came in, and you really became, you weren't just like church attenders. I mean, you were really part of the ministry. You were part of the ministry team, and then I left London to come back to California. And as I was leaving, and I had hinted to you guys, of course, over the years, that I really felt like God was going to send you out to plant a church.
We weren't trying to hear that. You know that, right?
No, you were. No, I don't think that's going to happen. But it came down to me, it was just obvious that yes, this was the call, this was the time. And so you guys went. Now our church was in central London, in the Victoria area, Westminster. But you guys had come over from South London, and you'd always had that burden for the community you grew up in. And so that's where God's got you today.
Absolutely.
You're doing urban ministry. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, and in that urban context. And of course, we're talking to people that are in all kinds of different places and need to know about this.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that really kind of compelled us to heed your good guidance and the leading of the Lord, and to go into South London and plant a work, was that we really saw that there was a need for something that was quite unique in our experience of church, as that we encountered at Calvary. And that was having a commitment to Scripture. We'd never heard of line by line, verse by verse teaching, exposition.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, we had been so blessed by it and recognized that this is really what people need in order to genuinely and healthily engage with God and grow in relationship with Jesus. And so, going into South London, we became somewhat of an anomaly, because there are so few churches that are not only just teaching the Bible. I mean, just that alone is a rarity
Right,
in many ways. But then at the same time, often those that are teaching the Bible are so culturally enclaved and removed from the community and the culture that they're just inaccessible. And there's great teaching going on there, but no one in the community would ever know or care, because culturally they're just so far removed and so alienated. And so we planted the church, and we first started in Dulwich, and then we moved a couple times, and we've now got a church home in Lewisham, where by God's great grace we have our own building, and that's through partnership with London City Mission. And so it means for the first time we're a community church, and we're based on a housing estate, or you might call them housing projects here, but it's a new build, and so it's not got that same kind of grimy character of some of the older housing projects in London, and in South London.
I want you to talk about that for a second, because most people go to London as tourists, and of course when you go to London as a tourist, you're seeing all of these absolutely amazing things, whether it's Tower Bridge or it's Parliament Big Ben or it's one of the other monuments, and you're there just going, wow, London is just such a wonderful place. All you got to do is just turn wrong down a street here, go through a back alley, cross the river. Just talk a little bit about life in South London for the average South Londoner.
So London is a hugely cosmopolitan place, as you know. People from all different nationalities and backgrounds and so on. And South London, over the years, has got a very large population of people from Africa and the Caribbean, West Africa in particular, Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica and other islands, and coming to England, coming to London, have kind of settled in communities within South London.
Yeah.
South London is huge.
Yeah.
London is a city of cities, I say,
Yeah, sure.
in real terms when you look at it compared to others. So we're talking about a big area, South London.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got some very defined communities, although integrated.
Yeah.
And so within that, as in many built up areas, you kind of get some of the issues, the sin issues manifesting in ways that are maybe common to what would be considered the hood.
Yeah.
So if you think of somewhere like Watts or Compton or South Central or those types of places, that will begin to conjure up a sense of what South London is like in parts.
Yeah.
And obviously there are, really nice parts, leafy and, well-to-do, affluent parts.
Yeah.
But they're often very much neighboring, just areas of real deprivation, high crime.
Yeah.
Our borough, Lewisham Borough, has over the past few years had the highest incidences of knife crime and young people being killed by stabbing.
Yeah.
And it's right now it's a problem. It's a huge problem in London.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of context.
And like I said, I don't think the average person that thinks of London even has any idea that is part of the reality in London. So you guys, of course, you started young. You're kind of older now, but
I am. So I've been reminded a few times over the course of the conference. Yeah.
So you started young, and obviously your objective was to reach those young men and women in South London and around London, but those who are into drugs and into crime and into just that whole scene. And then of course, since I was there, you've had this this homegrown terror thing that's grown up in the midst of London as well, which really wasn't an issue back 20 years ago, but it's very much an issue today.
Yeah, and we were having some sessions, like training sessions on Muslim evangelism, and we had a brother who's runs a team called Christian Islamic Dialogue, and so he was doing some work. He's from out of Phoenix, actually, a Calvary chapel in that area there, and he was doing some work. We were in the hall, and all our sort of walls are glass, facing the street, so people walking past can see. And he had a little bit of Arabic on the board and some surahs and so on. And we had a couple of Muslims come in. And they were kind of like, what's going on here? And it's not evidently a church building, so they were kind of thinking it's a community centre, maybe there's some Muslim teaching going on, you know? And they were British born. And we began to kind of talk with them about the Quran and so on. And they, when we spoke with Daniel, the trainer afterwards, he was saying that he sees more commitment and earnestness to Islam in those who are converts to Islam in Britain than those who are born of a Muslim heritage.
Yeah.
There's an earnestness now. Obviously, there's a lot they don't understand, because they're given a very sort of marginalized view of Islam, which is often quite radicalized. But nonetheless, those who are more cultural Muslims don't know the Quran as well as some of these British born. And so that goes to show the kind of challenge that we have, that we're engaging with when we're engaging with those who are British converts to Islam. They go hard. And with that, it can be quite a challenge to grapple with them in terms of actually presenting the gospel that they are at least to some extent aware of. It's been in the background in their lives. And to the extent where it's not really had an impression, they don't really respect it, they have no regard for it. And they're now given to Islam, which in their mind opposes that.
I remember a couple of years ago, and you of course remember this incident where there was a soldier that was murdered on the streets by a couple of Islamists. And the main perpetrator had grown up in a Christian home, had a Christian background.
A Nigerian guy. And it's interesting because that incident happened just a couple of miles away from the church. And that was in Woolwich, South London. And, it was really challenging the whole situation was just, you know, absolutely devastating. It was horrifying. They literally endeavored to hack this soldier's head off, just using kitchen knives, you know. And so once they had been captured, the police actually captured them alive, so they're now in prison. And the main guy, I think his name was Michael, he is regarded to be the most dangerous prisoner in the UK. Not merely because he's somebody who's inclined to be violent and kill other prisoners and so on, but because he is incessantly committed to radicalizing whoever he comes into contact with.
Amazing.
Now this is a British-born guy.
Yeah.
But the thing that really struck me at the time was there was a sister who lived streets away from where it happened, and we the next day we met up, and she was in floods of tears, and it didn't surprise me. Obviously, it was. I mean, everybody in South London was impacted by it. Yeah. You know, emotionally moved, and she was in floods of tears, and I was there, you know, just trying to just give her a chance to just express just where she's at and how she's feeling, and she said, to my intense surprise, she said, "What's going to happen to them now?" Because I mean, they were caught. We all thought they would just be killed on sight. Yeah, and they were killed. They were caught alive. Yeah, you know, and taken to prison and taken through the legal process. And her concern was that these guys are now public enemy number one, and how are they going to hear the gospel? Who's going to have any kind of compassion or interest in them actually being exposed to the gospel? Yeah, and that absolutely blew my mind, and that really spoke to me so tangibly about the love of Christ, and even such that it would be to the worst of sinners.
Yeah, that these guys would be needing the gospel.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just really deeply convicted by the Lord that they are still people made in His image. Yeah. And they've done terrible, terrible things, which no one would disagree is terrible. Yeah. And yet the gospel is still for them, and others like them. Yeah. And that's really helped to condition that my view and my approach to people who are of, who are Islamic, who are Muslims, in terms of not having such a hard heart toward them. Because there's no doubt that it would be very easy for me to have a hard heart.
Yeah, and this is something that I think all Christians have to grapple with, because there is that, understandably, there is that sense like, you know, these guys are, they want to kill us, they want to do us harm, they want to destroy our churches, or, you know, you see, of course, Pakistan, you see different situations in Africa. So, yeah, and, you know, we're at a pastor's conference right now, and you spoke this week, and part of what you talked about was that kind of, you know, heart for the person who would otherwise be an enemy, loving your enemies.
Absolutely.
Jesus said that, right? Yeah. You said that Jesus said that, and He did mean your enemies.
Absolutely.